Welcome.
Hi.
Hey.
It really
Should I
works.
turn sideways too?
Oh, so yeah, you were looking sideways to
Oh,
me.
we've never done sideways before, but then the words are up.
Oh, so okay, so I have to turn the phone the other way. So I have my oh no, it doesn't go all the way. Thanks. Sorry. So should I just hold it? Is that what I should do?
I guess so. I'm holding it. My tripod's not working.
Right, so I have a tripod, but I don't know how to make the tripod be not sideways.
I know, me too.
Okay, hold on. All right, I guess I'll just hold it. Strengthen my arm muscles. Okay.
So nice to see you.
Hi.
Hi. Welcome,
Hi,
everyone.
Hi. Welcome.
I'm so excited about this topic, and I'm so glad that I don't know if everyone saw Elisheva wrote about it on Facebook and then put it on her blog, and then we reposted it onto our blog. But it really is like a tough time. This lot of transitions and new beginnings could be pretty tough for people, and before we get into that topic, can you talk about yourself a bit?
Sure. I was actually thinking, I mean, it's up to you if you want to do this. I don't want to be redundant, but I was thinking while we wait for people to join the talk, I could read out that piece, those few paragraphs that really sparked this connection, if you're interested. I don't know how many people would have.
Sure.
Because that might be a good place to start. But first I can introduce myself. Okay. So hi. I'm Elisheva Liss. I am an LMFT, that stands for Licensed Marriage and Family Therapist. I came to the field of mental health through first having been involved in Jewish education. First at the high school, then more at the college and adult level. Almost from the very beginning of my career, I was focused on predominantly a Jewish demographic with a few stints in other places, but mostly always really treating people within the Jewish community, and predominantly also affiliated with observance, so primarily, Orthodox and traditional. So the work that I really learned to do was deeply embedded in a socio-cultural framework of different Orthodox lifestyles, beliefs, phenomena, and a lot of communal issues that would come up. So I'm a practicing Jew myself, born and raised. And so sometimes that can be both helpful and challenging in terms of serving a population that I understand intimately and relate to personally. A lot of the stuff that I was noticing in my clientele were repeat presentations, stuff that was coming up, again and again, more than once or twice. And it signaled to me that these were prevalent and active issues, but a lot of times I would find very little literature or conversation or resource on some of these topics. This was going back a number of years. So at first I developed sort of an accidental specialty in sexual dysfunction that really became my niche. And I know we scheduled to talk about that in November, so I'm going to leave that on the side, God willing.
Everybody mark your calendars. I forget what day in November, but
little teaser there. This will be this will hopefully be a G-rated talk tonight. But that was sort of what kind of, I guess, put me on the map in terms of, being able to serve the community and being able to connect with different communal leaders in a meaningful way. And then beyond that, I also ended up formulating a sort of a new narrative therapy technique that I'm hoping to, if we have time, to apply to our topic a little bit later tonight. And then I started writing and speaking and blogging, started doing a little consulting for organizations. Eventually wrote my book, and that's when my career really began to take shape. Sorry.
And could you tell everybody what the name of your book is?
Oh, sure. It's Find Your Horizon of Healthy Thinking. That's on Amazon, and I can talk more about it soon. But not the book itself, but some of the techniques that are presented in the book. But thank you. So after I started writing and doing training and consulting, I started to work not just with individual clients but groups and trainees and doing some gentle communal advocacy work, trying to just evoke positive change. I believe that knowledge is power, and so sharing knowledge is a really potent form of empowerment for people. Spreading psychoeducation, information, resources, guidance for anyone who can make impact. Rabbis and rebbitzins, school principals, premarital counselors, chassan and kala teachers, parents, anyone who's in you know, in a position where they can make a difference in the life of others, which really basically means anyone. You know, so I really resonate to the mission and the work that you're doing with Project Proactive. I feel very grateful and honored to have been invited. And I also thank you, you know, you, Rebecca, and also all of you here for helping me overcome a couple of my big fears. One of them is social media. I'm relatively new to social media and relatively old to be doing social media. One thing I've gotten really good at on social media is embarrassing my kids. But that's pretty much all I'm good at for now. But
aren't we all?
Yeah. It's in the small print, you know. And you know, and also doing these videos. So, you know, really confronting my own performance anxiety at this time that we're all confronting our, you know, spiritual and personal performance anxiety. So
I do that almost every week.
That's really commendable. I don't know how much ice cream it would take for me to be able to do that. Anyway,
I used to have a glass of wine before each talk, but I'm at the point where I'm good.
You're just high on life. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm okay. There's like a lot of love here.
Yay.
Like people like when people press like the hearts when you say something, you know.
Oh, you're seeing hearts. Oh, okay, great. I'm gonna look for those. Okay, thanks.
Yeah. You'll see like
yeah.
if you say something that people like, then they like press a button that makes like hearts shoot up, and you know.
Oh wow, that's so nice. But now I'm gonna feel like it's kind of a challenge. Can I get some hearts, guys?
There you go. There's a heart.
There's art. Oh, there we go. That's Rachel Herkman. She's very loving. Thank you, Rachel. I think, right? Was that Rachel? Mm-hmm. Oh, that's so sweet. Okay, now I'm going to be so distracted by this. All this, like, you know, conditional love. Okay. Anyways, that actually is really sweet. I'm gonna. Could you imagine if that happened in real life? Like, you went out to Costco and somebody like threw some hearts at you because, like, hey, you're just having a good day. The world would be a better place if you could just throw hearts at every. You know what? Let's start a movement. Right, construction.
All right, yeah, throw hearts at people.
Right.
There's that thing where you can send people these envelopes with like lots of confetti in it, but I think it ends up like annoying them because there's confetti all over the floor.
Right, we'll do virtual confetti. You know, it's go green. All right. So should we dive in with the original?
Let's do it.
Post that inspired this. So we were talking a little bit before. I had reached out to you just to talk me through joining an Instagram live, which actually was way less complicated than I thought it was going to be. It's not complicated at all. But we were discussing how this was kind of a last minute thing where I think no one specifically put us in contact with each other, right? It was you came across this post.
Well,
right?
I mean.
Oh, originally,
yeah.
Yes. Okay, who put us in touch with each other? Who was that?
Well, Rachel Tuchman told me about you originally.
Oh, she's such a good shot then, isn't she?
I know, she really
is. Good at introducing people. Thanks, Rachel.
She's my go-to for finding the best people around.
Yes, yeah. She promotes a lot of unity in the world. She's like so good at connecting people to each other. Anyway, so so this was something that I posted like late in the week last week. And you reached out to me, you had this slot, and you said, you know, it's coming up on Elul, it's very timely, you know, what do we say we talk about it? So we didn't really have a lot of time to structure or plan or strategize what we were going to say, so we're kind of going rogue tonight. We talked a little bit about the general theme, but we're very open to questions and comments and, you know, any direction that the listeners want to take us in. Mm-hmm. Right? Is that right, Rebecca?
I know, it's very rare. We're booked till like, I think almost March now.
Fantastic.
So it's very cool. Like, so when an opportunity popped up, it was such like, it was perfect timing it was exactly when I saw your blog post.
Yay. Okay. So I'm so glad it worked out.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and read this. And I hope whoever happened to have read it already will forgive me, but here we go. So something that I've been thinking about for a while, like years, is how this time of year in the Jewish calendar, the months of Av and Elul, can be triggering for a lot of people. There is this 2-month emphasis on the heavier side of religious experience: loss, destruction, suffering, then examining our deeds, reviewing our behavior, confessions, and doing repentance. The healthy version of the spiritual process involves honoring the process of grief and mourning in Av, yearning for a better world, and then using the month of Elul leading into Tishrei for introspection, connection, releasing negativity from within ourselves and our lives, and to rediscover and build out the best version of what we can be. But due to a lot of factors, including a socio-political wave of anti-religious sentiment zeitgeist in the academic West, and some disturbing maleducation from our systems within, negative religion has become something of an epidemic, particularly at this time of year when we're encouraged to do and feel difficult things. It's not light, it's not always feel good, and it can depress or alienate people. I've seen it firsthand in varying degrees, personally and professionally, the anxiety, OCD, and depression that can get triggered, intense focus on fixing the broken in the world and in the self. And this time of year is just a zoom in of what religion sometimes feels like for people in general, not only specifically now, particularly if they grew up in a home or within a school system that overemphasizes the guilt, shame, the minutia, the you're not good enough messages, instead of inspiring, loving, forgiving spirituality. So you have many kids and adults that will end up with a corrupted version of religion that's based on more on fear than on love, based on societal pressure more than personal integrity, and sometimes based on compulsion rather than like autonomous free will. I don't really believe that God intended for us to feel this way. I know it's something that I have to remind myself of all the time, to feel the light and the love rather than get bogged down by the pressure. And so what I've been wanting to start for a while is something called a project called Joyful Judaism. I don't have a clear-cut plan of what this would entail, other than just trying to do my own part to put out content that engenders healthy, empowered feelings within the religious experience. This last paragraph, in this week's Torah portion, the story of Moshe breaking the tablets is repeated. This is last week's Torah portion. He descends from the mountain, sees the people engaged in idolatry due to their own anxiety, their fear of abandonment, and misunderstanding about what God had expected from them. Moshe makes a unilateral, shocking executive decision to take the Holy Torah and smash it, because at that moment, the Jewish people simply couldn't handle the intensity of what was mandated. Without context, this could sound irreverent, even heretical, but the very last Rashi in Chumash quotes God as saying to Moshe, "Well done for breaking the tablets." Moshe understood, and he expressed that the Torah is there to uplift people, not to crush us. And the entire Jewish nation was rewarded with a priceless gift of grace and of knowing that we can and we will mess up, sometimes in a very big way, but that there's always the opportunity to heal and to reconnect. Love, joy, and trust are what create meaningful relationships. Going from Av into this Elul season, I take it upon myself to try and do my small part to find, share, and generate healthy, balanced, joyful religious content and invite others to do the same. I will try to use the hashtag Joyful Judaism to identify these posts. So that was the post that actually got shared a whole bunch of times and generated a lot of reaction. I think it kind of touched a nerve for people, and that was really what inspired us to do this live. So
the idea of the lucho, and like the idea that the original set has value as well, because it shows that the broken, that there's value in the broken as well, and in and it kind of, and it
very symbolic,
my mind isn't really working so well right now, but
that's with me.
I
was actually thinking about that on Shabbos in shul this week. I was listening to my friend's son lean the Parsha from the Torah, and I was thinking about this verse. I'm going to say the Hebrew phrase because it's linguistically significant, but I'll translate it. After the breaking of the tablets, God says to Moshe, "Psal lecha shnei luchot avanim karishonim." So you should carve for yourself 2 more tablets like the first ones. And it occurred to me, I'm sure people talk about this, but that the word psal lecha, to carve, is a funny word to use. It's not the typical verb that's used to carve. And it's not just linguistically similar, but actually like identical in terms of spelling to the word pesel. Pesel is an idol, because an idol is a graven or a carved statue. And I was thinking like that was hitting a little close to home, to use the word, pesel or psal to symbolize the fresh start. And I was thinking maybe the message, the metaphor is kind of what you were just saying, which is that the word pesal means pesel, it means an idol. It also means to carve, to create, to make something new. It's also from the word pisolet, which means like the stuff that was cast aside, the stuff that's no longer needed. And like you said, the broken tablets were kept in the Holy of Holies because there is the possibility to recreate and get something new and more appropriate from the broken. And the broken doesn't need to be completely discarded. It's something that can be transformed into something even more beautiful. Like those artists who take the shrapnel from rockets and, and they turn them into menorahs, things like that. So
and also our tendency to idolize perfection.
Wow. Yeah.
Could also be a tie.
And how paralyzing that can be.
Sorry?
And how paralyzing that can be when we idolize perfection rather than process.
Right. So yeah, that's a very powerful
symbolism. Yeah.
Part of the Torah. And when we were brainstorming also, we were talking about that even if there are people on here who aren't Jewish, like it always seems to fall out around the same time as the beginning of the school year, the beginning of a new whatever. It's just like it's the start of, for everybody, there's something in the air.
Sure.
And that brings a lot of pressure up. We posted a question to people, and I think a lot of people were the pressures that were coming up were comparing myself to others, either in school or holiday prep, like when people have things ready like a month early, and
cooking, and shopping and clothing and all
right, to financial like
trips,
people have decor, and I'm just like spiritual goals that are unmet for the year, sadness of unmet expectations, and like somebody wrote like that, still no baby, still no partner. So it's kind of like a mark, like a signpost that
here we go again, another year, unanswered prayers, unmet goals, can be very heavy. Yeah. So
and kind of like also a lot of pressure. I think it's a lot of spiritual pressure because people really don't understand what the holidays really about, what school's about, it's not really, you don't show up and...
You're talking to a homeschooling mom. You may not want to get me started on that.
That's awesome that you're homeschooling, Mom.
Thanks. Maybe we'll leave that for another live.
Oh yeah, I want to hear all about it.
But no, school is where a lot of this stuff begins. But you know what? The majority of people are, either in or sending to school. So we do need to contend with that piece of the cultural experience.
Yeah.
So I wanted to start with a sort of a trigger warning. Is that, I'm sure that this is not unique because you cover really heavy topics probably on most of your lives. But just because this is my first time, I guess I want to sort of be responsible. And just point out that we are hoping to touch on some very intense ideas, and whenever we do this, there's sort of this concern about, on the one hand, feeling like it's very important to bring things out of the dark and into the light so that we can start to problem solve and validate and normalize and connect people to each other. But the occupational hazard is introducing the possibility of people maybe being exposed to upsetting thoughts or ideas that weren't there before for them. I remember I once had a professor who told us that in grad school, who had said that he tried to start a support group for people with eating disorders, for anorexics, and he's realized pretty quickly that people were just sort of teaching each other more clever ways to starve themselves, and in fact that's not one of the recommended modalities for treating eating disorders, at least to my knowledge. It's not my specialty, but so there are always these concerns that when we bring up these topics in a certain way, that we don't, if there's anybody listening who's just likes to listen because they want to, educate themselves, but they themselves don't struggle with these thoughts, then please know that however you're relating to this time of year and to these holidays and this process, that's great. Keep going, keep doing what you're doing. If you're happy, then you're just learning about how to be sensitive and empathetic to people who are having a hard time, but just check in with yourself. So if what you're hearing doesn't resonate to your experience, or if you struggle a little bit, but what we're describing here is way more intense, please don't see that as an invitation to fall apart. It's more just, like, we need to know, we need to be able to talk about the worst case scenarios. So like if this doesn't resonate as your reality, then wonderful, and it's just one more thing to be happy about. And if it does, then I'm glad you're here, and I hope that we can offer some suggestions.
It's an important point, though, that a lot of people that join us are actually educating themselves on how to be sensitive to others.
Because this isn't necessarily their struggle. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's an important point.
You don't want to bum them out,
Yeah.
Okay. So that I just kind of wanted to put that out there as like a not really a disclaimer, but sort of a proceed with caution. So I was thinking that but ultimately, of course, we believe that the benefit tends to outweigh the risk in terms of addressing issues rather than stigmatizing or sweeping them under the rug, which is what we're here for. I thought maybe we would spend like the first section of tonight's talk sort of outlining the problem, validating that it really is like a nice number of people who get to feeling this way sometimes. And then, switch over and spend like the second half and sort of zoom in on possibilities of what we can do to try to make this better for people. So like you said, please feel free to jump in and interrupt me, you, Rebecca, or anybody else. I made a few notes here, but like I said, we're sort of off-roading. So, just cut me off at any point if you want to debate or question or clarify. This time of year brings a lot of different factors that can be challenging for people, as you said. The primary, I think, common denominator between all of them is change. I had another professor in grad school that I quote a lot, and he used to say that most people will choose a familiar problem over an unfamiliar solution, because most of us are just so afraid of change. We gravitate towards what we know. Even good change, people make good changes, a new job, a new house, or whatever, but it generates anxiety because we crave homeostasis. So the summer is ending. We're going to be adjusting to a new routine, starting a new academic year for children, for parents, even adults who don't have children. They spend the first 20 years operating life within a cycle of the academic year. I mean, we're sort of conditioned to associate the chill in the air with, like school supply shopping. Parents have this stressful stretch where the kids are sometimes in limbo. They're not in like a day camp routine or a school routine. And, for working parents, that's super stressful. You need to get coverage. Sometimes marriages get stressed. Like, well, I had a meeting. I thought you were going to stay home with them. I thought we had a sitter. The sitter canceled. Her kids are home too,
That was my week last week.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, my kids are bigger now, but I remember I always tell young moms, like, the most stressful days in a working mom's life are when you have work and they don't have school. Like, it's like, what do you do?
Mm-hmm.
So that's really hard. So that stuff is and then it kind of like everything is just fraught with that extra tension of like there's no time, and the guilt about like not being fully present at work or neglecting the children. Like, there's so much like family stuff that goes on at this time of year. There are logistic arrangements that have to be made for the year, carpools or busing or school supplies, clothes and uniforms, and then yontif arrangements, like you were saying, for the holidays. Are we going? Are we hosting? What are we buying? What are we cooking? The expenses, the shopping, the food, the socializing, the plans. Another thing that's really important to point out is that people who have some sort of loss or divorce or loneliness in their families often feel it more acutely during all the holiday seasons. And we need to look out for those people, the elderly, the people who are living alone, the divorcees, the widows and widowers, even the empty nesters. Sometimes if they're still married, to invite them for a meal, sometimes that can feel lonely for them too. The singles, there's a lot of people who are not, we're still very traditional in terms of our normative structures, and people really feel that come the holiday season. But anyway, so we get these and then finally, when these couple of weeks are, the school starts, and then they get a few weeks of routine, and then that gets interrupted by the holidays, and then you have to start a new routine. Another thing that I think is worth pointing out about this time of year is the change in the weather. Probably a lot of you have heard of something called seasonal affect disorder. SAD is the acronym.
Yeah, that was on the list too.
Really? Oh, so I didn't see everything. I know you sent me a couple things, but please interject more. So apparently, seasonal affect affects 4 to 6% of the population, and that's a lot. That's 1 in 20. That's a lot of people, and even people who don't have a diagnosable level of disordered mood or feeling, For sure, people have like subclinical versions. You know, I know for me, like I'm like substantially happier in the summer. Like it takes like that little bit less effort. You know, you just walk out and you feel the warmth of the sun. You know, and so for people who feel really, really down when it gets cold, you know, even just the slight chill in the air that we've been experiencing the last few days, you know, from the mid to high 80s to the low 70s, is something that sometimes brings on that sort of foreboding feeling. And, you know, the beach and the swimming starts to taper off, the sweatshirts come out. And, you know, that in itself can be a trigger for people. But the main factor that I think we were talking about, you know, trying to discuss tonight is this like spiritual angst that sometimes accompanies this season. So one thing that you and I had talked about a little before that I thought might be worth mentioning is that a therapist discussing religious issues can sometimes be tricky. I know, like in my office here, like with my clients, I do try to keep it pretty clinical because, you know, at least in my community, people have a lot of options of religious mentors and teachers that they can talk to about, you know, Jewish subjects or religious subjects or, you know, philosophy and stuff like that. And my job is to really be an accepting, therapeutic presence in their lives. The exception that I'll make is when it feels like it would be in a client's therapeutic best interest to go down that road of their religious life and talk about it, in which case I'll just ask them, like, you know, should we address the religious aspects of your life? And, you know, generally once I'm asking the questions because they've already indicated that there's something going on. So I had asked you, Rebecca, I said, like, is this an appropriate place to, like, bring in some religious context? And of course you said that it is because of the nature of our conversation. But I did want to sort of put that out there that, you know, for some people for whom religious life is loaded, is complicated, you know, just based on whatever you've been through, you know, family, school, personal relationships to like God or religion, you know, like just sort of check in with yourself, see if you're okay, see how it feels, and honor whatever boundaries you need with that. You know, we definitely don't want to come off as sounding like we have any particular religious agenda or a dogma. It's, you know, it's not therapeutic to feel like someone's preaching to you. You know, on the other hand, we never want to be like come off as irreverent or disrespectful of, you know, religious values and beliefs. And there is, you know, profound benefit to judiciously and, you know, gently incorporating spiritual resources into this work. You know, so I'm hoping that for tonight we'll be able to strike, you know, an appropriate balance of honoring the reality that we do each have our own personal narrative and relationship to religion, to God, and to be able to address, you know, what often happens when these relationships can sometimes take us into unhealthy thought patterns, and try not to throw out that, you know, proverbial baby with the bathwater. Yeah, just gonna like.
It's a tough balance, that one.
It really is, and I don't think anyone can ever get it perfectly right. Like I don't know how many people there are on this live right now, but as we're talking about these like very personal, very, very loaded topics, I'm sure like it's bringing up a lot of like memories and associations and even, you know, feelings or even traumas for people, and, you know, want to be sensitive to that.
Well, just the idea of you know, showing up to synagogue on the holidays and, you know, and feeling like, oh my gosh, I can't concentrate. So like, what's wrong with me? Everyone else seems like they're like so into it.
The judging,
and then
the comparisons.
Yeah, and then you know, I mean, I remember thinking like, okay, I don't think I have like the right mindset. So like, what's even the point? Like, I feel like it's like it is a breeding ground. Even just sitting in shul for those days are breeding grounds for feeling like not enough.
Yeah, the inferiority complex. And what do they say? Like, comparison is the thief of joy, you know, like the looking around and I don't measure up spiritually, you know, or in whatever way, you know, like shul can be very distracting in that way. Totally. Do we want to start with like the Av piece of it, like that first?
Yeah.
We have another few days of the, so we're talking about the Hebrew months of Av and Elul. Av is the month that's finishing up right now. We have another few days, and so this energy has been here for a few weeks already. I always thought it was like ironic that the 3 weeks and the 9 days and Tisha B'Av were in the summer, because the general vibe is like sunny and carefree. I always felt like maybe it'd be better if we could schedule them in February, you know, when it's dreary anyhow, but like nobody asked me. So like, without getting too historical about it, the month is literally described in the Tannaitic literature as a time when joy is reduced. It like literally says that. It's a time of mourning, fasting, deliberately restricting activities that bring pleasure and comfort, music, and a lot of people internalize this like punitive message, like it's our fault, you know, we got to punish ourselves for the bad stuff. We destroyed the temple. It's our fault that there's still all this suffering and that the world is still broken. And reading the very distressing words of the Megillah of Eicha and struggling to understand, like, how can I love and trust and connect to a God who allows all this like cruelty and violence to exist, and then judging ourselves, so I'm such a bad Jew that I had these thoughts, you know, and that can be very complex for people. And then you finally, you know, kind of get through the month of Av with, you know, this acute disappointment that once again I failed to bring the redemption. It was my job, and now we're moving, you know, into Elul. And in Elul, which is the month that precedes the high holidays, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, Elul, in a lot of yeshivas, Elul gets like promoted as crunch time. It's like finals, the big annual performance review. How did I do? We got to clean up a whole year's worth of messes and disappointments and deal with 11 months of debt and guilt. Yeah, I remember like having this nightmare that you showed up for the final and it's like, oh, I studied for the wrong one, you know, or the adult version of it is like, oh no, it's Erev Pesach. I didn't realize it was going to be Erev, you know.
But also like that's kind of what, depending on what school you went to, that, I mean, that's what you're taught, like, you know,
Totally.
Rosh Hashanah is like the biggest, this big court case, and
Sure.
you're being judged, and
it's not entirely untrue, you know, so it's not like we can undo this and say, oh, you know, that's hogwash, that's propaganda. No, there is truth to that, you know, if you look at the sources. But, you know, we're always cherry picking, you know, whenever any of us quotes, you know, a source, a Gemara, a Medrash, you know, it's always out of context, you know, because it's not like, here, let me read you some Shas, you know, start from the beginning, start with Bereshit, you know. And so once we're anyway cherry picking, you know, part of this idea of joyful Judaism is, you know, a lot of people are losing the joy. You know, certainly we see people who are just walking away, who are just saying, you know, this isn't for me, this is not working for me. But a lot of the people who even officially like are staying within their religious communities are, you know, are not necessarily feeling connected. I was talking to someone today who is a very intelligent, very spiritually sensitive person, but she was feeling bogged down, and she said, like, you know, I just kind of wish I could fast forward to the end of the Yom Noraim, you know, to the end of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And I said, oh, why? And she's like, you know, I just not in the mood to like stand in synagogue for so many hours, like thinking about what a terrible person I am. Like, it's just too exhausting. Not just to be a wonderful person who said this, but you know, there is a lot of literature in the Torah, in the Chumash, in the Mishnah, in the Gemara that talks about the greatness of humanity and the empowerment and the possibility. And I think that it might be better for, you know, for ourselves as adults, for the children, for students, if we started cherry picking from those messages. Certainly in this generation, I think that's what we need to hear more of. And not to say that we shouldn't correct things that have been done wrong. I mean, that's definitely a healthy thing to be able to do, but to temper it. There's a Rashi that I love that says that God's propensity or God's inclination towards benevolence, towards giving, is 500 times stronger than his tendency to punish, right? So based on that, right, it's actually taken from the Yud Gimel, the 13 Midot of Rachamim that we read in the Slichot prayer over and over and over again, you know, if you're Sephardi, and the whole the last days before Rosh Hashanah, and certainly over Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And the idea, could you imagine if we like mandated for our parenting, oh, look at all those pretty hearts, thanks guys. Oh, makes my heart swell. Could you imagine if we mandated like for ourselves in our schools, like for every you know, ounce of like censure or criticism or negativity that children get, either about themselves or about religion or about God or about, you know, punishment, they heard like, you know, 500 things about, you know, how much God loves you and how much he believes in you and how much possibility there is and how much meaning there is in your life. I mean, that would be such a different experience for us.
that's kind of like Sarah Hannah Radcliffe, when she did a live with us on parenting. She talked about the 80-20 rule.
It's
about
like, same idea, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, but this would be like, you know, 500 to 1, right? But it's the same notion about looking at those looking at those proportions, looking at the percentages, and just sort of seeing like we don't want to paralyze people with fear. That doesn't do anybody any good at all. It doesn't help the relationships. So there are a few layers to this stuff. There's the philosophical, the theological, like what do we actually believe? So a lot of people grapple or they falter with their faith from time to time. Like, what does God mean to you, to me, to, different versions of what ideals are, what would living my best life look like, from my perspective, from the Torah perspective, from halacha, like the interpretations, Torah's never been monolithic. Lifestyle practice. So many people are just confused about what that even should look like, for us. There's this culture of taking things upon ourselves, which it comes from a good place, of this personal growth and transformation. But sometimes you hear, especially like in certain communities where kids as young as 10, 11, 12 are being pushed to like take upon themselves very rigid performances and observances that are not necessarily age appropriate, that are not necessarily engendering feelings of empowerment or spiritual connection. It's more of just like more things to not eat and not wear and not read and not watch and like not more tunnel vision, as opposed to like ways of doing more chesed, more kind of expanding outward, like tapping into the potential of self and being able to cultivate that. I think is like a much healthier way of accessing spiritual energy at this time of year. A lot of people's concept of God has to do with how we were raised. I remember there was like one point, I must have been like 5 or 6 years old, where I pictured God as George Washington. I know this sounds like a terrible thing to say, but I realized why. It's because I think on the dollar it says like "In God We Trust," and there's George, so it's funny what your brain does, and somebody set me straight. But if a parental religious home was experienced as harsh or rigid or threatening or unforgiving or critical, then that's kind of a tone that gets assigned to God in people's minds sometimes, and then there becomes this like fear. Or if religious mentors or institutions tended towards fear-mongering and shaming rather than inspiration, then the spiritual striving is often driven by fear of failure or humiliation, more so than personal fulfillment. Whereas if we believe in a benevolent, forgiving, generous, loving version of a creator, it just makes everything so much easier. So that's the theological, element. Then there's the psychological element, how we are wired, like just how we think, how we feel, how we, behave and interact with ourselves and people around us and reality. Do we tend to feel calm and confident, strong and hopeful? Do we tend towards worry, dread, hopelessness? Do we fall apart easily? Like, when we know these things about ourselves, we can access our resources and preempt our weaknesses. Then going a little deeper, there's the existential, the question of like what you started to touch on before, Rebecca, like what's the point of life anyway? There's like this theme of life right now. Like even this week's Parsha, it's like, look, I'm putting before you literally life and death choices. It doesn't really get more pressurized or intense than that. And so many of like the Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur davenings, Asar Sini Tshuva, is that, Zachrenu L'Chaim, like a lot has to do with life. It's so heavy, it's so heady. Choosing life, begging for life. So it could spark a question of, well, why? What's it for? I had one client who was like really depressed, and she told me, sometimes I feel like she gave me permission to share this. She's like, sometimes I just feel like life is a cult. Nobody asked me if I wanted to join. And then there's all these rules, and I have to follow the rules or else, Obviously, that's not a very, happy or healthy way to look at it, and unfortunately, that's not the way everybody looks at it most of the time. But it's not a ridiculous, construct.
Yeah.
There's some logic there. It's true, and the Gemara actually says it. You're born against your will, you die against your will, and noach lo adam shelo nivra. It would have been easier and more comfortable had I had been born, but well, here we are. Let's try to lead moral, ethical lives. It's intense stuff. So people tend to naturally, avoid pain and pursue pleasure. That's just human nature. It's unhealthy to pursue pain, unless there's some greater reason for it, which would be pursuing the pleasure of the accomplishment. So for a lot of people, when life becomes too painful or demanding, sometimes like the will to live itself can start to waver. That's one of the main sources of depression. And like certain parts of the liturgy, like let's say Nasana Tokaf, this part of davening, we talk about like all the different ways we can suffer or perish. You know, it's almost like a glorification of being afraid in this time of year.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it's tricky because so many contemporary notions about mental health and self-determination and self-acceptance, you know, sort of rumble with a lot of the energy around, you know, the theology of this time of year. You know, you see the slogan all over, you know, I am enough, you know, feel I am enough. And yet the Musar talks seems full of the opposite message of, no, we're never enough. There's always more striving that we need to do.
You know what? I've been thinking about that a lot lately because
specifically the I am enough thing.
Specifically that because that's like something that I've been working on is feeling enough, but obviously like that's not how we're brought up. We're brought up to be like, okay, you could do it, you could, you know,
push yourself, always take on one more thing.
Like I mean, like it's I don't know too many people who were brought up like, it's okay, you know, strive for mediocrity, you know, like it happens to be like we joke around with one of my kids, like kind of likes to take the path of least resistance. So we
I don't know anything about that.
Yeah. so we're always like,
got at least one.
Way to go. Like, yeah, the way to strive for mediocrity.
I call it
but
being
like
a committed underachiever.
Yeah, but I mean, why is that? It happens to be mediocrity is something to strive for. I mean, but
balance is something to strive for. You know?
Yeah, I guess balance is a better word, right?
Than mediocrity. Yeah.
Because excellence, there's like never.
It's awfully close to perfectionism. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and also because a few weeks ago I was swimming with my son, and I said to him, "Practice makes better." And he's like, "No, practice makes perfect." I said, "No, you don't want to be perfect. If you're perfect, then you have nowhere left to go." He's like, "That's not the phrase." And he's trying to convince
Mom,
me.
Quit it with the PC stuff. That's great. That's really funny when they call you out on it.
Yeah.
But you know, jokes aside, it's an interesting, you know, I remember many years ago struggling with this, thinking like, on the one hand, yes, you know, I was actually thinking it again from a spiritual point of view, but you know, so often the spiritual questions parallel the psychological, and it's just really a question of the vocabulary, but it's the same themes, the same constructs. So I remember thinking about this idea of Ezehu Ashir Hasameach B'Chalko, who is wealthy, one who is who's happy with his lot. And I remember thinking, like, exactly what you just asked. Like, okay, if I am happy with my lot, isn't that called being complacent? Isn't that called just resting on your laurels, right? And aren't we encouraged to pursue excellence? Aren't we encouraged to try to be, you know, an ever improving version of ourselves? And so I had this idea that the Mishnah doesn't say Ezehu Asher Hasaveh B'Chalko, who is wealthy, one who is satisfied with his portion. It's Hasameach B'Chalko, someone who's happy within his portion. So happy doesn't mean complacent. You can be happy and say, I'm happy I wrote a book, but I still want to write more books, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think that, you know the Serenity Prayer, right? I'm going to just, even though probably most of you already know it, I feel like it's just such a wonderful thing to share always. It's really originally taken from the model of addictions, the 12-step program, but it's really something that anyone, who believes in any spiritual context at all could benefit from, which is, God grant me the serenity to accept the things that I cannot change, the courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And the idea of there are certain aspects of life, of ourselves, of certainly other people, of reality that for now, they just are what they are. And so in those moments, to have that radical acceptance and just say, it's okay. It's okay for the imperfections to be there and the way they are. Mm-hmm. And then the wisdom to say, but, I have free will to be able to try and make things better. And where is it worthwhile for me to invest my energy doing that? And so it's
kind of like where we put do you think that oftentimes we put the comma in the wrong place in the sentences when we're translating things?
Explain.
Like, so basically what you were saying, but then it reminds me of something that one of our rabbis taught us. We were talking to him about the idea of, the Misha Nichnas Adar Marvim Besimcha, and then also there's the Misha Nichnas Av Me'atim Besimcha, right? So he said that you should always be Besimcha, right? So what does it mean when you say an Av? So you have to just switch where we would naturally put the comma, and we have, so really the comma should be Misha Nichnas Av Me'atim, comma, Besimcha.
Nice.
Right? So
That's
like
so nice.
that, so for anyone who doesn't understand what I just said,
Yeah.
so really like instead of saying when we enter the month of Av, we have to limit our joy. So really it's when we enter the month of Av, we
reduce. Yeah.
We reduce, but with happiness.
Still with joy. There's still a certain amount of joy. We grieve, but there's joy within the grief.
Right. So maybe like all of these things, when we put all these pressures, unnecessary pressures on ourselves, really like maybe we have to rethink how we're interpreting the texts, and
sure.
I don't know.
Yeah, so that's exactly where I was hoping to go with this tonight. So maybe we'll segue into like the alternative perspectives that'll.
Okay, but before we move on,
sure.
I just want to kind of scroll back at the questions.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
Enough may not need to be mediocrity. Maybe forgiveness this time of year should start from within.
Beautiful.
And then somebody else said, we just have to remember we are being judged favorably by our Father. He wants us to have the best year. We have to look at our accomplishments as well.
So that's an example of someone who either was raised or he or she himself cultivated a much more generous paradigm of theology of what God is. That's a great example of where when you see God as being on your team, you're coming into this with like, I know the coach, of course we're going to win this. We got this, so that's wonderful. If that whoever wrote that either clearly was gifted with the kind of, education either from home or from the wherever they got educated religiously, or they self-educated, they created, and that is the goal, to be able to start to feel like that, to come into this with a space of confidence. And like that other person also said, from a place of forgiving oneself. Now, and forgiving oneself doesn't mean excusing things that we did wrong. Like if I did something wrong and I could say self-forgiveness doesn't mean saying I did nothing wrong if I did something wrong, right? Taking accountability is really healthy, but being able to, use this teshuva process and say like, hey, I'm human, like everybody else, and I messed up, and this is the opportunity to fix that. I once heard a really great story. I wish I could remember which rabbi it was from. I want to say maybe Rabbi Chaim Shmulevitz, but please, whoever knows the correct rabbi, either confirm or correct me. That somebody came and he went to the rabbi and he said, I feel so broken. I feel like I'm such a sinner. I'm such a terrible Jew. I don't know how I'm going to go into this time of year, with all this guilt and all this, all these sins. And the rabbi said, yeah, and besides for that, you're a Baal Gaiva. You're arrogant. You're narcissistic. And the man said, seriously, like I'm just telling you how broken I feel, and you're labeling me, arrogant. And the rabbi said, yes, because the Gemara says that in the history of the world, there were 4 people who never committed a sin. I believe they were Amram, Yishai, Kilav, and Daniel. Not Daniel, the Sefer Daniel, the son of Daniel, right? And no matter how hard you try, they're not adding you into that Gemara. So it was sort of a backhanded reassurance of like, yo, we all sinned, okay?
But there are people like somebody who I'm really close with tends, whenever they do something wrong, this person like gets into a very dark hole, very, very, very dark, and
it's a shame spiral. That's what Brene Brown calls it, a shame spiral.
A shame spiral.
Yeah.
And I one time said like, do you think that you're on level of God or something, that you wouldn't do anything. Like
you hold yourself to such unrealistic standards.
Right. Like if you look throughout Tanakh, like we're
really
messing up left and right.
Really awful things, right?
Yeah. Read Navi. I had to like take a break.
Right?
Yeah, I had to take a break from learning Navi. We started Nachayomi last year, and after Shoftim.
Oh, Shoftim is rough.
Yeah, after Shoftim, I was
once
like,
you got
okay,
to
I need a break.
you got to go through some trauma work. Yeah.
Yeah. No, seriously.
Yeah. No, it's not for the timid. Yeah.
And they're like on very high levels.
Sure.
So why are we exempt from that? Like what makes us better that we're not better?
Right. And once do you ever hear of Tal Ben Shachar? Do you know who he is?
Why does that name sound familiar?
He was very popular a couple of years. I mean, I'm sure he's still pretty popular. He was the Israeli champion of squash, the sport squash.
Yeah.
Right? And he wrote a couple of books on the pursuit of happiness and how perfectionism is something that gets in the way of happiness. And when he was awarded like the #1 squash champion of the whole Israel, he said the first thought that crossed his mind was, well, Israel's a small country and people here aren't really so into squash. Now I got to go see if I can beat Europe. Like that was like literally the thought that he had. And that's what he was like a very sick level of perfectionist. And once he realized this, he decided to take his career in a different direction and became a You there?
Yep.
Okay, good. I apologize. I put my phone on Do Not Disturb, but I guess I messed it up. Anyway, so he became like a Harvard. He became like a Harvard professor of like one of the most popular seminars on happiness in Harvard. And one of the things that I loved from his book was he said that he had to rehabilitate himself and move from his perfectionism to what he calls optimalism. It's a subtle, it's a linguistic, acute distinction, but it's very profound when you think about it. Perfectionism is, I need to be the best. There's no room for error. There's a zero tolerance policy of, everything has to be exactly the way I believe it should be. And God help us if anything goes wrong. Optimalism allows for the human error, allows for limiting circumstances, allows for the possibility of multiple positive outcomes, not just one objective truth, and sort of says like we'll try to do the optimal performance or the optimal version of the task given the situation that we have, including where I am today. Like whatever I am today at this point in my personal development is what I can bring to the table. And if the person I am today has a headache or is distracted by something or has a sinus infection or whatever, then that's going to be a little bit of a limitation too. But I'll just do a reasonable best I can. And that shift from perfectionism to optimalism is like a really great distinction. It's the difference between, pushing oneself to the point of paralysis versus the pursuit of excellence, allowing for messing up. As the verse says, the tzaddik could fall 7 times and get up again, Yeah. So in terms of, let's say, the way depression or anxiety or OCD get triggered by this stuff. So, I don't want to spend too much time defining depression and anxiety just because they're so broad and there's so much, we can speak for so many hours on them. But, depression is often characterized by a feeling of discouragement, a feeling of hopelessness and pointlessness. Anxiety is a sense of just not being okay. Like, I'm not okay. You're not okay. It's not okay. Nothing is okay. And either letting stuff from the past or from the future, smush out our present, right? So sometimes the anxiety will come from I did all these terrible things and I'm probably doomed. Or worrying about the future of just so many bad things tend to happen in the world, probably it's going to happen to me and my loved ones, right? As opposed to being able to just be present and just say, right here, right now, I'm okay, we're okay. It's and there's things that we can do. Now, most people have these feelings in varying degrees to some extent or another. That doesn't mean that everyone's going to be diagnosable, although probably many more people are diagnosable than get diagnosed. But one way that I was taught to quantify how intrusive these phenomena are is to look at DIF, duration, intensity, and frequency. Right. So the frequency is how often does this happen to me? Intensity is how bad does it get? And the duration is how long does it last? So if if I'm in a pretty healthy place and I have this fleeting momentary thought, maybe every once in a while, you know, when I'm praying or when I did something I'm not proud of or whatever, but I can release it. I can say, oh, I goofed, I messed up. It's, you know, whatever, I got to do better. And I have this like productive guilt, you know, the guilt, you know, that I think that the Maggid said that healthy guilt is like to the soul what hunger is to the body. So it doesn't feel good to be hungry, but it's good that we get hungry because it reminds us that we need to feed ourselves. We need to eat, right? If we never felt hungry, then we might like, you know, forget to eat and faint, you know. And healthy guilt, it gives me that feeling of like, you know, I don't feel right. Oh, you know what? I did something not so nice. Now I got to make it right. I got to go apologize, right? And a healthy reaction to guilt is just to say like, okay, I gotta, you know, fix what I did wrong or do better next time.
But guilt seems to get a little abused, no?
Well, I mean, there's like a very popular distinction between guilt and shame, you know, and those are, I mean, Brene Brown divides it 4 ways. She does embarrassment, humiliation, guilt, and shame. But if we want to keep it simple, healthy guilt looks like this. You know, if I made up to do a live with you and I forgot to come on, and you know, you and all your audience is sitting there waiting for me, and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's 9:15. I was supposed to be on that live. I feel so inconsiderate. So I get on and I say, oh, I'm so sorry. I completely forgot. I didn't mean to inconvenience everyone. It pushes me to, you know, appropriately apologize to the people whom I've inconvenienced, and for me to ideally learn from the experience and next time set an alarm so that I'll get it right in the future. But I don't sit there saying, oh, I'm such an idiot. I can't believe it. I can't get anything right. Remember that Sesame Street character who used to smash his head on the piano every time he messed up, like playing a song, like, oh, you never get it, you know?
Yeah.
You know, so, you know, guilt is like, I did something wrong, and shame is I am something wrong.
Right.
Yeah. And so, you know, there are people who beat up on guilt. They don't like the concept of guilt. I think guilt is something that has its place judiciously. You know, it should be embedded in a general context of forgiveness and grace and compassion, you know, for ourselves. But a healthy version of guilt is the ability to be accountable and to say like, hey, I'm just an imperfect human. I made a mistake. I made an error. It's correctable. And then I can learn from it and move on. You know, I can.
Do you have any pointers if somebody, let's say, doesn't have that gauge, like maybe they're like the thermostat is off a little bit with their, you know, healthy guilt versus, you know.
Yeah.
So for this time of year, like, what are some pointers that will kind of help to reframe things in a healthy way when your internal messages might just not be there yet?
Sure. Okay, so one way that this doesn't work for everyone, but it works with a lot of people, particularly women. Sometimes when I'm sitting, let's say, with a client who's beating herself up, you know, really, really unfairly, you know, like she's really overreacting to something, you know, she's being unkind to herself, you know, really overly punishing herself for something, either a quality or an event or something. And I'll say, let me ask you a question. If your sister or your best friend called you and said, I'm feeling really awful, let me tell you what I did, or let me tell you what happened, right? And then I give like a variation of the story that they just told me. I said, what would you say to her? You know, there's no way that you would say the kind of cruel, judgmental, blaming things to your sister or your best friend if she called you confiding that she felt bad about having done this. You would give her reassurance. You would say, oh, you know, don't worry, we can try to fix that, or oh, that must be rough, but you're a really good person, right? So usually when we turn that flashlight on somebody else, it gives people the perspective to say, like, you know, a lot of us are way meaner inside our heads to ourselves than we are about other people. Not everyone, but many people are.
I mean, there are some people who are pretty judgmental about others.
Totally. That's why.
So does that work for them?
So it depends on the context. You know, people are complex. I don't think that it's, you know, an all or nothing thing. Sometimes with certain people, like, you know, those people who are really hard on themselves and really forgiving of other people. So for those people, this is a good exercise. For the people who are just really critical of everyone, themselves and other people or whatever, and they're really feeling beat up by something, what I would tell them to ask themselves is, okay, so you're feeling lousy about something you did, right, or something that you tend to do. What's a productive response for you to have to this, right? Like it's. I remember I was once sitting with a couple, and it's not such a nice thing to say, but I'm going to say it anyway because this is, you know, keeps it authentic. The wife was like listing to her husband some really not nice things that he had done. He's like, well, what do you want from me? I suck. I don't like that word, but he's what he said. Like, what do you want? I suck. She goes, oh no, that's a cop-out. You don't get to just say, I suck, right? She's like, yeah, and it was such a brilliant response.
Yeah.
She's like, well, what do you want from me? She's like, you don't suck. You're a really good guy, and that's why I married you, and now you just need to make something right. I'm like, you guys don't actually need me, because, you know. So sometimes the beating ourselves up is almost like a cop-out, and again, I'm not judging someone who does that, but like, in a way, it's easier to just like keep falling into the quicksand than to like pull ourselves up and say, wait a second, okay, so if I believe that in the possibility of correction, of repair, of goodness, if I believe in a God that wants me to do things better, what's my next move? Where do I go from there? Right? And
I just said that to somebody last night. That I think every type of Hasidus has like a different version of this quote.
Okay.
But Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, I think that's if you believe that it could be broken, then you could believe it could be fixed. And I think the Lubavitcher Rebbe also has a slight variation on that.
Yeah.
But,
yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's the key. The key is not to be someone who never does anything wrong. The key is to be able to repair, you know, that resilience. And just sort of to circle back to the idea of the horizon of healthy thinking technique. The idea of that narrative therapy technique is the I would turn the phone around, but I don't trust my ability to like then turn it the back way. I have it in my office. I have some beach pictures, and I use the analogy of the horizon. And sometimes, you know, there are 3 ways to engage with our thoughts or reality or relationships, like anything that sort of crosses our path. There are 3 categories of ways to engage with it, what I call below, on, or above the horizon of healthy thinking. If you picture the horizon, like where the sky meets the water, in my case it's water or the earth, below the horizon is drowning, right? Ugh, I stink, I'll never get this, I can't be, you know, like, I'll never amount to anything, I'm useless, like, what's the point of everything, you know, life is stupid, right? So if a person sees that they're feeling really low and hopeless and, you know, any kind of what we call unproductive negativity, really, really angry and getting angrier, frustrated and getting more frustrated, more anxious, depressed, blaming, self-critical, you know, all of those low, yucky feelings that are pretty easy to identify once we get into that metacognitive place where we can say, oh, I notice what I'm feeling or thinking. Then we say, okay, I'm drowning in my negativity, right? And just sort of like take a deep breath and say, I don't want to be drowning in negativity. That's not doing me or anybody around me any good, right? So we stop self-flagellating and sort of say, okay, how can we engage in the second way of looking at our reality, which is what I call on the horizon of healthy thinking. So I have a picture of like a sailboat bobbing along on the water. And then we just sort of relate to reality as it is. So let's give an example of something that a person might beat herself up about.
That they didn't have time to make 10 different dishes for Rosh Hashanah, and they only had time to make
culinary
a one-pot meal.
Okay, so fine. So culinary ability, right? So that's actually a pretty good example because it's not a big deal. You know, like we can all agree that it's not tragic, but someone who's really, really hard.
I don't know. Some people think it
could really chain spiral about not making a gourmet meal. Okay, so great. Let's use that as an example because it's relatively simple. Below the
I don't care,
thinking. Pardon?
I mean, I personally like. I've given up on that, but
right. I never tried. You got to know what you can do in life.
But I do know people that it's like their identity.
That really themselves. Okay.
Yeah.
So the below the horizon version of that, like, oh, I'm such a schlemazel. Everyone else has it together. You know, my friend works more hours a day than I do, and her freezer is fully stocked. I'm such a loser. People are going to come to my Yantif meals and feel like, you know, I don't even know how to cook. I'm the worst balabasta ever. You know, and they use it to sort of beat themselves up and compare and blame themselves and feel bad. That's low. On the horizon is sort of just acknowledging the reality for what it is, which is something along the lines of like, I don't feel so good about my Yantif menu. You know, I kind of wish that I had time or that I was organized enough to have made more. So you're acknowledging the reality for what it is, right? It's a negative feeling, but you pull away like the intense negative charge and just react to it as it is. Like, oh, you know, I didn't get to make as many things as I would have liked, right? So you're engaging with it from like a more even-keeled place. So most of the time, being able to engage in that even-keeled sort of way is fine. But there's a third possibility, and this is really where personal growth takes place. And I call it above the horizon. And the picture that I have to signify that is a seagull flying over the water, over the horizon, which is any way of looking at something that promotes either acceptance or productivity or personal growth, right? So the acceptance version of that would look like something like this. Right now, I didn't get to make as elaborate a Yantif menu as I would have liked to. I was working a lot, or I have little children, or I just, I'm not yet organized enough to be able to do that. And so, you know what, no one's going to go hungry. It'll probably be more nutritious, and it'll be fine. It is what it is. I can buy some takeout, or we can just cut up some fruit, and it'll be fine. However it is fine. That's the accepting version of it. Just being able to say, like, however it is something that we can be okay with. The action version is to say, like, oh, I'm really disappointed because I would have liked to have like a more elegant, more celebratory, meal plan. I see this month, Yantif, I wasn't going to get to it, but I know that it would really give me a sense of accomplishment if I could do it going forward. And I have a friend who's really good at that. So after Rosh Hashanah, I'm going to call her up and sit down with her and ask her to walk me through doing a better menu for Sukkot. And I'm, because this is something that's important to me, and I want to learn how to do it, in a more improved way. So it's acknowledging I am disappointed that I wasn't able to perform at the level that I wanted to, right? So you acknowledge the negative feeling. It's not like we're pretending it's not there. We're not like Pollyannaing and saying, well, anyway, this is what I wanted to do. I think it's done. When, so denial doesn't help. Acknowledging, like, yeah, I'm disappointed. I would have liked to cook some more. Giving ourselves the grace of saying, it just wasn't happening this year. I had too much going on. There wasn't enough time. There were kids. There was work. There wasn't enough money. Whatever the reasons were. Allowing, understanding, and then either saying, but it's going to be fine, and just accepting and being okay with where it is, or saying, what can I do to make it more, more like the outcome that I would have preferred, one or the other. And so what's really neat about this technique is that I actually have worksheets that, God willing, when I fix up my website, I'm going to make them downloadable, of below, on, and above the horizon of healthy thinking way of formulating any thought process. So
is there something that we could post to the stories after?
Yeah, I'm going to send you. I'll just take a picture of one, and then you can post it after. And then what you do is it doesn't take more than 5 minutes. If you're reasonably self-aware and emotionally eloquent, it doesn't take more than 5 minutes to take a thought process and articulate it in that negative, unpleasant way, and then transform it into something more even-keeled, and then try to challenge oneself to think about, okay, how can I then make it something even more productive, like either, again, challenging myself to reach for the goal that I want, or challenging myself to embrace acceptance and self-compassion with the reality that is. Either one of those is above the horizon of healthy thinking. And the way you know that you were successful is that it leaves you feeling either empowered and pumped and motivated to get where you want to go, or with a feeling of inner peace of like, you know what, it's good. I'm good, and it's good, and it's really okay the way it is. And we can do that.
And this is in your book.
Yeah, the book talks a lot about this stuff. I want at some point to do like Horizon of Healthy Religion. I think I do have a chapter in there about, the spiritual self. But I think this is something that we really struggle with in our education systems. There's so much information and inspiration that could be utilized to empower young people and adults to really, really be autonomous in terms of their relationship to learning and understanding and growing, in religion. But very often there's this, like I said, this like fear mongering, this competition, this shaming. I remember once being in 11th grade, and I read this article. At the time, it really was very motivating. I think maybe 10th or 11th grade, like somebody said something like, how ridiculous is it that thousands of times a day you say, the words mashlik karcho kafitim, and how many people can translate that? I remember thinking like, oh wow, I better learn what every word of tefillah means. So I sat there with my sitter, and I went with an art scroll sitter, and I translated every single word that I didn't know, and I prayed from that sitter every day for a while. I was a strange child. And until I knew that I could, I could translate any part of davening. So, I'm happy that I have that skill, but it wasn't necessarily coming from the best place. It would have been so much nicer to be coming from a place of like, hey, we're saying these words every day, and they're so rich with meaning, and they're so magnificent. It's probably worthwhile to take the time to get to know them. It's such an important neurolinguistic difference in terms of how we market and how we promote these messages, for ourselves and for, and for the next generation.
Somebody, Mental Health Proactive, she's one of our ambassadors. I don't know if you know about our ambassador.
Thank you. What is that?
She said we need to inspire, not critique teens.
Oh my gosh, so yes. And not just teens, little kids and middle school kids and college kids and ourselves. You know, the language of this generation is not reprimanding and recrimination. You know, there's a time and a place for correction, but it has to be done with so much love.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And to remind ourselves, you know, God doesn't want us to be miserable. You know, He wants us to be stable and happy.
I actually had a conversation. I don't know if did I tell you this?
I don't know. Yeah.
I had a conversation with somebody. I think I did tell you this. That
you can tell all the other people this.
that somebody was like that I couldn't do a specific mitzvah because of for a specific reason, and somebody said to me like, oh, is that if you're gonna burn in hell, like is that the one that you're gonna go down on, like something like ridiculous like that?
Really intense. Well,
so I like turned to him and I'm like, I don't believe in that God.
That is a good line. I don't think you told me that story.
No. Because I just feel like that's not how we.
Yeah.
It's not conducive to growth.
No. In fact, I do the other way. Like I joke, like one of my kids once asked me something like, oh, Mom, I think I said an Al HaMechia, and I was supposed to say a Borei Nefashos, what do I do? And I was just like, oh, Gehenna, you know. Like, yep, that's really bad. You know, like, it's okay. So you know, God knows what you meant.
Right. But I think that's the truth. Like, if you think of like this punitive being who, like, Ed, who, you know, is out to get you, that's a very different relationship than than a relationship with somebody who created you and loves you. And actually, I don't know if you got to that when you were talking about Elul and Tishrei.
I was going to say that at the end. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Yeah. No, it's totally fine. Did we address the questions that people wrote in? Because I wasn't doing a good job paying attention to what people were typing in while we were speaking. Was there anything else we needed to address?
No, I think we're good.
We got to it. Okay.
Yeah.
So, so I just to add like a few more of these like sort of like religious ideas, this joyful Judaism concept. So in these Devarim Parshios, like it's a great opportunity to, I think it's not a coincidence that the book of Deuteronomy is what we read in these, in these weeks preceding the Yom Noraim, the high holy days, because it really reads like a Musar Sefer. It really, there's so many famous and intense verses about just how to become the best version of ourselves. So in the Shema prayer that we say, multiple times a day, it says, "V'ahavta es Hashem Elokecha," right? You should love God. And Rashi there quotes, I guess it's a Medrash or a Gemara, where he says that you can't compare serving somebody who serves his master out of fear to someone who serves out of love. And I remember learning this in like 7th or 8th grade and thinking, oh my gosh, it's like so true. And it goes on to say that if I serve you out of fear, right? Like if you're my boss and I'm afraid that you're going to fire me or humiliate me or, blacklist me or whatever, there comes a point where there's only so much abuse that I'm going to take from you. And I'm just going to say, you know what, forget it. I don't care, and just walk away. But if I'm serving you out of love, right? If you're my mentor and I hold on to every word you say and I view it as my privilege to be connected to the work that you do. And it's like so great for me. I want to put in more hours and I want to work harder and I want to perform better because like I'm so connected and I value it so much. I'm willing to go so many more extra miles, and so just that message of, v'ahavta, like God wants our love more than our fear. And I noticed at one point, like one time when I guess maybe this is a little like too much self-disclosure, but I was reading v'ahavta es Hashem Elokecha on a day that I wasn't really feeling so loving. And I thought to myself, like, when I was davening, and I was thinking to myself, like, it's really hard to be commanded to have a feeling. And then my eye wandered to the page before, because it was like the pages were, open like this. And I saw that the prayer that we say right before Shema is the prayer of Ahava Rabbah, which it describes God's love for us. Ahava Rabbah, a great love. And I was thinking, wow, I never even noticed this, that before we have the command to love God, we have the reassurance that God loves us greatly. So like the only way that we can, that we can be expected to have the love is because it's reciprocal love, and we have like in these parshas in the Torah, so many times we have the phrase v'samachta b'chol hatov. I always think to myself, like, there's so many contemporary chumras, stringencies that some communities are creating. Some of them are, really seem to be not really necessarily rooted in actual primary sources, and some of them are just sort of like sensitivities and extra things that people take on. Imagine if we took an initiative to be more machmir in being besimcha, like just sort of say like, I'm going to take up guitar lessons because I want to be machmir in simcha. I want to be more into the mitzvah of simcha, right? Because there's so much good. And I think I once counted like 7 or 8 times within a few parshiot that it says v'samachta b'chol hatov, like to notice this idea that God wants us to be happy. And so the thought that I shared with you before is that we started out by talking about these months of Av and Elul, right? So I was thinking that, the word Av means, besides for the month, it also means parent or father, right? And the month of Elul is an acronym for a few different things, but it's most famously Ani l'dodi v'dodi li, right? I am to my beloved and my beloved is to me. So the very means of these 2 months hint to 2 of the most meaningful, primary, powerful relationships that we have: the parent-child relationship and the loving partner relationship. And those relationships are very raw, very vulnerable. They have the capacity for tremendous love and tremendous hurt. And so, I was thinking that, maybe in Av, we're looking up to God as like this, like, he's the father, he has the power, we're feeling small, we're trying to like figure out how to please him. And then in Elul, we're encouraged to look at him as our lover. I mean, it sounds strange to say, but the whole Megillah of Shir HaShirim, the Song of Songs, uses this like very romantic love analogy of like trying to get close, trying to connect. And something really kind of cool is that another one of the acronyms for Elul is Inali Ado V'Samti Lecha from Parshat, I think it's in Mishpatim, but don't quote me on that, I may be wrong on that one, which refers to when somebody by accident kills someone and has a place to like run, like it wasn't like, it wasn't on purpose, but they needed to run away so that the relatives don't chase after. So it's like built into Elul is like, you're going to make mistakes. Like, what's a bigger mistake than accidental murder? But like, that's built into this love relationship. Like, even accidental murder has a place in the Torah. We can deal with that, on Yom Kippur. I remember I was once like, I was debating someone and I did something a little snooty. And I said like, oh, that would probably be as inappropriate as talking about like adultery in shul on Yom Kippur, right? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, do you know what we learn in shul on Yom Kippur? We learn about adultery. Every human experience has a place that we can, that we can rumble with, that we can deal with. So we have this of, the parent-child relationship that can either be, traumatic or it can be healing and bonding. We have this love relationship. When you love someone, when you commit to them, you're giving them the possibility to hurt you, but also to uplift you and to help you self-actualize. And I was thinking maybe that's what these months are about, cultivating these dynamics within our relationships. And sort of one more idea, also from a Torah, kind of angle, is that, the time of the year when we're kind of focusing on this stuff is Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah means like the beginning of the year, but the word Rosh also means head, right? Beginning is really like Techilat Hashanah, like Hatchalat Hashanah. And the word Shana means year, but it's such an interesting etymological word. The word Rishanot also means to change. It also means to teach, like Vishinantam Livanecha, and review. It also means teeth because we digest. So it's a really rich, it's a very rich root word. And so I was thinking that besides for Rosh Hashanah meaning head of year, beginning of the year, it also means like the head of change, like a mental shift, like a new way of looking at ourselves and of the possibilities that this year can bring. And so I guess what I would like sort of leave off as my last message, maybe you and your audience are more than welcome to like keep commenting or asking things, but like my last thing that I would say is just to sort of like take this idea of like when we're feeling that like low, paralyzed, discouraged, worried version of what this time of year can feel like, just sort of say, wait, if I do believe in God and I believe in Torah and I believe in this whole construct, is that really what he wants me to be doing with this? Is that really where I should be going with it? Is that really going to lead me anywhere good? So, and if not, how can I take the feeling that I have and sort of sublimate it and elevate it into something that's going to make me feel better, take me to a stronger place so that I can either accept where I am and be okay with that, or if something needs to be improved or enhanced, I'll make that enhancement, to just, work a little closer to that goal, but, from a gentle perspective with that grace.
That's great. I mean, what can you add to that?
Somebody wrote, can you write out the quote that you said before? It would be my pleasure, but I'm not sure which quote you're referring to. You want to give the gist of it?
We'll go back and take notes on that. I tried to take some notes throughout, but I'll go back hopefully and take some notes, and we'll do some.
We'll do like a follow-up with, maybe we'll do that worksheet and anything else.
That'd be great.
Okay.
Thank you so much. It was so uplifting, and if anyone wants to message Elisheva, kind of, because sometimes people don't want to put comments in here, but I'm sure
with a DM or email or something.
You can ask some questions. Elisheva practices online in addition to in New York, so if you want to utilize her services,
you're marketing my practice.
You could do it from your living room, from your bedroom. You could just be in your pajamas, and she could support you from.
That's one of my favorite things about online lectures. I don't have to drive anywhere. I could just turn on my phone. Here we are. It's so much fun.
It's the best. And I hope that everyone has an uplifting. We'll see you next week, but that we should be looking forward to growth, and you were better ending off than me.
No, you're good. Keep going. That's beautiful. I actually just wanted, as you were saying, that really lovely ending, and wishing everyone probably blessing and personal growth and productivity, and being able to meet our goals and access our best spiritual selves in this season of personal growth and self-examination and improvement. I just wanted to add one more thing, is that whenever a person speaks about heavy topics like this, there is a little bit of a risk of touching up against a nerve. And if I did that in any way tonight, I hope that you forgive, anyone who heard it does forgive and understands that it was entirely unintentional. And that these words were designed, as we say at the beginning or at the end of Shemon Esrei, you the Ratzon and Reiki only be, the intent and the words were really just designed to help and never to harm. And I wish and bless a very productive season to everyone here. Thank you so much for hosting.
Thank you so much
for coming.
We'll be in touch.
Yes, sounds good. Pleasure talking to you.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Good night, everybody. Thanks for coming.